I remember a book by Peter Singer. I believe it was called Animal Liberation. It was one of the first books that came out on animal activism. This was after I saw The Guns of Autumn, so I had stopped eating meat. But my son was still eating meat. You know, it wasn't by way of turning him into a vegetarian. It was just, this was a very, very good book. And I said, you ought to read this. And he said, no. And I said, well, you really should. And he said, look, I don't want to read it, because if I read it, I'd have to stop eating meat. And I said, well, you wouldn't really have to stop. And he said, sure I would. I wouldn't want to after I read this. And I felt like saying, well, reading that book on growing your own weed didn't seem to stop you. Communicating the importance of animal rights to the average person is, I feel, extremely difficult. That package of meat is so far removed from a slaughterhouse or a factory farm that you can easily disconnect. People want to disconnect. People don't really want to think of what they're eating. Most animal shelters are admittedly depressing. People do not want to be depressed, so they don't go into these places. I don't think the reason is because they don't care. I think it's because they do care. And I think most people do care about animals. I've known Chris for at least 20 years. I found out about Last Chance for Animals, I believe, through a mailing. I met Chris. Believe me, Chris must have made one hell of an impression on me, because I do not go across the country for any reason at all. And I went to California. This involved an investigation of Ringling Brothers Circus. And that was the first time I ever met Chris, who was he's a very impressive person. He's one of the most intense people I have ever met. His incredible devotion to animals, you just don't see that very often. Not even in people who are indeed devoted to animals. I'm writing a sequel, and I'm using one of these in the book that Chris has told me about. I haven't asked him if I have his permission, but the story is so terrible, and it's so good, really, at the same time, that I'm using it as an incident in this book. I enjoy making animals characters, trying to make them as interesting as the human characters in the books. Sometimes they're more interesting. I got a letter from a reader who said that he and his wife had read all of my books in this series, and they had really always liked them, except for this book, in which I have a cat and a dog sitting around communicating with each other. And my wife wanted to tell you that we have a cat and a dog, and they don't do that. And I wrote to them and I said, how do you know? And that sort of generally is my feeling about humans and animals.